see you.
James, thanks for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Awesome. So we're here today to talk about your journey. So this podcast is all about showcasing leaders in scale ups, and you've got a really interesting story to tell because I was having a good look at your profile before we came on the call, and you've come through a really different, I think I'd say different direction where you've not had perhaps that typical SaaS leader path where you've kind of come from a slightly different area. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, sure. I started in the Obama administration as a presidential appointee working on foreign policy. So the Ebola epidemic was one of my big projects, and I assure you that is a much more terrifying pandemic than COVID. And I worked on everything from public-private partnerships to help vaccines get through the cold chain with Coca-Cola to Africa, or to empower women in Vietnam with a basket weaving collective, or to figure out how to partner with universities that have a great grounding in science and engineering and technology and scale those innovations into the world of global development, not just another, say, social media company. And so got a sense of how working at one of the world's largest organizations, if not the world's largest organization, the US government, with about $1 trillion in spending every year, could be organized in a way that would drive towards purpose-driven goals, but also engage the private sector in a way that leverages emerging capabilities, whether that's like quantum or blockchain or AI, to benefit humanity. And so that sort of became a bit of my niche. From there, I worked on what might be regarded as the world's least successful presidential campaign. I worked on Martin O'Malley for president. For those of you who don't know him, that's okay.
I don't know him.
Few people do, but we did go head to head against Trump before ending ignominiously in Iowa. And then decided to pivot towards the private sector. So I got a job at Nike. I moved from the East Coast on Washington, D.C., to the Pacific Northwest, having literally never been there before. Yeah. And at Nike World Headquarters, not only are there really cool running tracks and climbing gyms and basketball courts, but you have a company that with such an immense global brand can stand for almost anything to anyone. And so I helped start this new small center of excellence called the Nike Narrative Center of Excellence that did everything from innovation launches to investor relations to sustainability positioning to launching a new partnership like we're making the NBA uniforms. And in that role, I had a chance to work with the C-suite there, from the CEO to the CFO to the COO, to very much help Nike stand above its individual products and instead stand for something as a global brand driven by purpose, relentlessly innovating on behalf of humanity to make everyone on the planet feel like they're an athlete. And one of the things that I noticed when I was at Nike, whether I was writing an earnings script or standing on a Formula One racetrack with guys trying to run the world's fastest marathon, was that we very rarely measured the impact of what we were doing. Okay. We'd spend tens of millions of dollars, organize thousands of people around a marketing campaign or even a set of corporate positioning messages, for example, our new corporate strategy. And we had a very limited understanding of whether or not our reputation was shifting positively relative to our peers like Adidas or New Balance or Under Armour. And so it sort of gave me this idea, like, what if you could track the aggregate impact of every communication, every message, every executive moment, every corporate strategy shift, every M&A deal into a single thermometer that would measure your perception in the market and then break it down granularly into specific storylines. And so from there, partially driven by me wanting to move back home to the East Coast, I live in Boston now, but partially driven by this idea having legs beyond the walls of Nike, I went to Weber Shandwick, which is the world's largest publicly traded marketing and communications agency. And I was able to start a new practice there, no surprise, called the Narrative Strategy and Analytics practice, where we brought together data scientists and engineers with comm strategists and people who specialize in messaging and op-ed writing and executive communications. And what we were seeing is whether it was Johnson & Johnson or IBM, every single company wanted to communicate its corporate narrative consistently, and authentically and measure the impact of it. And so
Yeah.
rather than in a consulting context doing these one-off projects that were quite expensive, I teamed up with my co-founder, brilliant guy, Shan Biglione, who led product for my new company, Kelp. And we both quit our very comfortable jobs, asked our wives if we could get on their healthcare plans. And I'll never forget that first Tuesday where you look at your calendar and it is just a vast sea of emptiness, as it is nothing but you and your idea and your dwindling bank account. But that was several years ago, and I'm happy to say we've somewhat made it through the other side.
So I've got there's two questions that come to mind, and you talk through this that it sounds so seamless what you've gone through there. So I think the first thing that came into my mind, and I know lots of people will think this now, and I think lots of people have had this thought. This is a sort of pre-COVID journey or post-COVID journey that lots of people have gone on, where they're in one lane maybe in their life and their career, and the way you talked about the switch from working in government to working at Nike, you made sound so straightforward. So my first question is, how did you do that? Because I bet there were people at that interview process that maybe already worked in that sector. And then the second part of the question is just how you mentally, I think, go from working for Nike to doing your own thing. You haven't got a paycheck coming at the end of the month. And so two questions for you there.
I think about the mental hindrances between people switching career paths as external and internal. So internally, hey, I'm really good at this government thing, so maybe I could do a political campaign, but selling shoes at Nike, that's a step too far, right?
Yeah.
I think we all can relate to that. Externally, it's no surprise that employers have a massive bias towards people who have done a similar job before. And so at Nike, I very much had to communicate, listen, I know I've done this for politics and public policy, but I love sports. I'm a massive Boston Celtics and New England Patriots fan. I have season tickets at the Red Sox. I'm in a kickball league, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I actually remember being in my interview at Nike, James, and my future boss saying, you need to amp up talking about how much you love sports. So I do think it is important to break through that mental wall internally to say, listen, my skills are translatable. And that's something I've constantly tried to do. It's a ever ongoing process of building up your confidence. I think we all can relate to that. But then externally, trying to convey my story to Nike or to Weber Shandwick or to potential customers for Kelp and now Signal AI in a way that helps folks understand our skill sets are translatable and relatable. Our skill sets connect with each other. When it comes to quitting your job and going out and starting a company, absolutely, you are laying awake at night for months, in my case, quite literally years before, percolating in this idea, figuring out what would be the tangible next steps to building something. How would we go to market and reach out to enterprise customers who are our main target and actually get them to take a bet on, at that time, a relatively small company? And I think what gave me confidence was the ability to see the idea come to life in two contexts. One, to see it come to life in the Nike context, where I was working at this Fortune 100 company and seeing how we would rarely measure the reputational impact of all of our marketing and communications activities. So I thought, okay, well, if that's true there, then I have somewhat of an empathetic understanding of what it must be like at perhaps a less sexy, but no less big company. And then when I got to Weber Shandwick, the exposure to so many Fortune 500 C-suite clients, when I started my practice at Weber Shandwick, I almost exclusively worked with either CMOs, chief comms officers, chief HR officers, chief information officers, and chief executive officers. And over, they were asking me that same question. How can we, on an ongoing basis, quantify our reputation, zero in on our strengths and weaknesses, mitigate the weaknesses, enhance the strengths, rinse and repeat month after month, quarter over quarter? And so I saw the need over and over again. Now, to be fair, there's a big emotional leap going from the need to building something in a technology context, not just a consulting context, that would allow you to answer that question in a more automated fashion and across a huge variety of verticals. Nonetheless, the key thing that I've found, whether it's interviewing for a job at Nike or trying to help a CMO of a Fortune 50 company understand the impact of what we've built here at Signal AI, is that we are here to relate to you as a human being, I want to understand your personal pain points in your job. And it is very much the personal relationship aspect of it, whether it's you telling your story in a way that relates to their personal skill sets, or you telling the company story in a way that relates to their personal job description. I'm a big believer that we've got to be relationship led versus talking about like the widgets and the data points and all the metrics that can also all too often fly over people's heads.
So really, you were confident, weren't you? You'd found a gap in the market, you'd found a need, and I guess all you needed was the technical partner or the technical founder to actually bring the software to life. So how do you know? Because your skill set, I imagine, probably lays more. You're stronger, I imagine, the relationship side, the commercial side. How can you get the confidence that you've got a product that really fixes the problem? How do you know unless you're really technically minded? Does that make sense?
Sure. Well, when it comes to the commercial side, particularly as it relates to like the SaaS industry, I've never worked in sales. But because I had worked with so many Fortune 500 communications, marketing, corporate strategy, investor relations, and executive departments, I had a pretty good understanding of where they felt their pain points, where our clients had issues, whether it was preparing for a board meeting or going on an investor roadshow or announcing that new M&A deal, let alone like doing a marketing campaign. And when I teamed up with my co-founder, Shan Biglione, who was chief strategist at Publicis at the time and had stints everywhere from Europe to China, I joke with him, the only continent he hasn't lived on is Antarctica. One of the first things that Shan said to me was, I'm not sure that this is possible. And I think that's actually a really good phrase to introduce co-founders together with. We're not sure this is possible, but with energy and us bringing our passion to it, perhaps we can stitch this thing together. So that's exactly how it came together. Shan, my co-founder, really embraced the product side of things, whether it was working with our data partners or frameworking our scoring systems. And then my job was to very much be the voice of the customer, help us come up with the strategy of what the product looked like and would feel like, what the interface would do for customers. And I think that tension, right, of saying, here's what a customer really needs, can you pull it off? And then the technical co-founder saying, you've really sold me down the river here, I'm not sure we can pull it off. Make no mistake, there is tension sometimes, but what I think is so beautiful about having a co-founder 50-50 working relationship is what I am fundamentally trying to do is intent-wise in your best interest as well. And so we're just trying to drive towards making this vision successful. But we were thrilled because within the first 6 months of launching, we started working with one of the world's top life sciences companies, the guys behind the #1 COVID vaccine. The next customer was one of the world's top defense and aerospace companies. You've seen their stuff in Top Gun. And then from there, it started snowballing. So we were very fortunate to see some traction early on. And that market resonance not only gave us the confidence to keep building, but also the resources to innovate, to hire individual talent, and to think about expanding our product into different industry verticals. So you're right. It's very much an emotional process, but once you get a little bit of traction, it is a bit easier. The toughest part, as you're hinting at, is that very first week where you say, I'm quitting my job, and then you're just sitting at the kitchen table.
So how do you go from the kitchen table to some of these fantastic deals that you've done within 6 months? How are you actually getting the attention of these customers? Because there's so much noise, isn't there? There's so much outreach. There's so many people trying to get time of CTO's time. How did you do it? Because that sounds amazing.
Yeah, I think three variables: help, network, and hustle. So from a help standpoint, being willing with great humility to reach out to everybody you've met in a professional context and say, can you introduce me? Can you give me feedback? Can you help me think through my go-to-market strategy or my product strategy or what this interface looks like? I'll never forget, we had a initial product. It was very much in beta. And I was showing my friend at Boeing, who obviously was dealing with some significant reputational issues that we've all heard about. And our beta showed that Boeing was like really highly ranked in reputation. And he was like, see, Gaynor, this product doesn't work. You've made a bad bet with your life. And it's like, obviously, a tweak to the scoring algorithm helped us get it better. But that sort of humility, that embarrassment I felt when he gave me the feedback about his own company was funny and tough at the same time. Networking is essential, right? So if there was somebody that I knew from my time at Weber Shandwick who could help connect us with a great talented analyst who could join our team, fantastic. If it was somebody who could, connect me to a Pfizer, fantastic. But like constantly asking in a catch up with somebody, hey, can you give me this next step? I think was absolutely critical. And then, maybe just to iterate on the third point, which is, I think that feedback is essential because when it comes to starting your own company, you naturally have biases. You have to have this illusion that everything is going to work out exactly as you've planned on a PowerPoint deck with you and your co-founder. And so just constantly asking for feedback from folks allowed us to not only sell the product, but actually shape the product in a way that made it more sellable. So rather than think about a sales pitch, again, I've never worked in sales from okay, here's the deck, here's the price point, here's the package, here's the seat. I would very much approach it as a design partner. And I would say, okay, Pfizer, if you had an AI team at the ready trying to quantify corporate reputation, how exactly would you go about approaching it? And then from there, because we were small enough at the time, we could use some of these technologies to be flexible and then adapt a product exactly to their needs. Lo and behold, those pain points that I was getting feedback on were translatable across industries and especially across specific verticals like tech or life sciences or defense or manufacturing. And that very much welcomed an outside perspective that ultimately enhanced the product.
And do you think it helped that you didn't have a sales background? Do you think that was actually a benefit?
Definitely. In my first time really working in a sales context has been since joining Signal AI, and I've learned a ton from my revenue-oriented folks, make no mistake. But I would say when you're starting your own company, I would very much see myself as, okay, I'm on your team now. I'm your quote-unquote tech expert or your tech partner. Let me design this with you. Versus thinking constantly, how do I slot you into my own individual commercial model? And make no mistake, you start out with some sort of very incongruous requests. Hey, I want you to build this thing, and the dashboard has to work this way. And you're asking yourself, okay, if I build it that way for you, that's so custom to your business, how am I possibly going to scale it? But over time, those repetitions build a better product overall. So I think the key thing is to think about it from the perspective of agility and not sales.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. And what's your, at that time you've gone through this mental process where you're setting up this company, you're confident because you've spotted a market opportunity, you're confident because you think you've got a great product for the market. Are you then laying out a roadmap where you've got a really clear sort of vision and purpose, or are you just thinking, hey, we need to just get to the end of the quarter and try and make some sales and pay our bills? And have you got this vision to scale and sell the company? What are you sort of thinking at that time?
I think one of the tricky things in starting your own company is that you need to think at both ends of the time spectrum. One needs to be, here is our vision for how the world is going to operate when we are wildly successful. And then the other is, oh my God, how are we going to get the check-in on time to pay the talent? And what I saw was we needed to be less selfish about our vision. We need to stop treating our vision as this like proprietary thing that no one could know about. You hear this mistake all the time in the startup world, which is like, no one's going to steal your idea, but people will very much resonate with it and accelerate it. And that very much is the story with Signal AI. We have this deck for VCs. Here was our vision about this horizontal B2B SaaS platform that could be your intelligence engine, starting in reputation, but moving quickly into risk across reputational risk, supply chain risk, HR risk, you name it. And we walked in, and rather than treat Signal AI, potential data vendor, but also a potential competitor, as this adversary, we presented the vision, and I'll never forget saying to the CEO and founder of Signal AI, David Benningson, who's an amazing guy, what would it look like if we took this all the way from piloting something together to really embedding in the organization? And that's very much what kicked off the acquisition process. So your question very much initiated the team up whereby we've been absorbed into Signal AI. It's been an incredible merger where we have access to their world-class tech stack and an unrivaled data library, where we have access to engineers and data scientists on the product side that really have propelled our vision. And we have access to folks on the commercial side, the SDRs, the AEs, the CSMs, who we didn't necessarily have formalized within Kelp, but very much do similar things in terms of engaging a relationship, scaling a relationship, and keeping a relationship running. So it's exactly thinking that way in terms of conveying your vision that led to such a fruitful acquisition.
So it happened so quickly, didn't it, as well? Because, I think, am I right? It was in like 12 months you went from complete scale up from nothing founder to acquisition.
Well, mindful this is being recorded, but we were percolating on the idea for Kelp for a good bit longer than once we officially incorporated. But yes, once we incorporated with a good amount of backstory already in the books, we were acquired exactly a year later or so. And actually, we're recording this today on July 22nd, and this is our 2-year anniversary at Signal AI. So it's a momentous occasion nonetheless.
Happy birthday.
Yes. And I think the reason that it came together so quickly is to the point I just made, the alignment of vision. Right? When we walked into Signal AI and we shared this vision about this horizontal platform that could provide intelligence, Signal AI sort of stood up and said, we have the same plan. And one of the things that we saw was their incredible leadership on the technology side, their incredible customer base. Signal at the time worked with about half of the Fortune 500, and now works with more than half of the Fortune 500. And so, yes, we found that because the alignment in vision was so clear, we were relatively quick in being able to architect what a team up would look like. And don't get me wrong, there are a ton of moving pieces. We needed to really build our product on Signal's platform. We needed to engage with the commercial team to create a go-to-market strategy and educate everyone on the different products that we were bringing to the fore. We also needed to reemphasize and revamp our go-to-market approach for enterprises, right? Signal, like many startups, was very strong in the SMB space. And now its biggest growth momentum, its biggest revenue contributor, and its stickiest clients are in the enterprise. So helping make that mindset shift among the commercial team was also very important. That allowed the acquisition to happen quite quickly.
So how did that impact the team that you'd built at that time? So you got through this journey really quite quickly. And one of the things that people say to me about when businesses are acquired and merge and things is the retention of the culture. So we've got this great sort of, can-do attitude culture where we're all in it together, and then this merger happens and it all sort of changes. So how did that work for you guys, and how did you sort of navigate through that?
Well, I think what's really great about Signal AI is the leadership team is filled with really experienced pros. And our COO, Stephen Lucas, has been through this M&A journey, a few different stops over the years. And he had a really good idea. He said, listen, at the start, I want to make it so that you guys are continuing to operate as if nothing has changed. And then over time, just the natural momentum of the organization will get to a full integration. So that was really helpful at the start to just say, listen, keep going, keep driving, et cetera. And then over time, we would sort of bring more people into the fold. So train a bunch of commercial folks to really be specialists in selling the quote unquote Kelp products that are now the insights products of Signal AI. And then eventually, because of the momentum that we had in growth, the organization naturally turns its head and says, okay, like, what are you guys up to? How can we team up internally within the organization? And it happened, I think, in a really natural, organic way. At the same time, we repackaged the way that we were doing insights at Signal AI. So we had Kelp, which was all the corporate reputation C-suite work. We have the API products. So for example, our custom dashboards and data feeds. We had solutions engineering as part of that. And we even have things like newsletters and metrics reports. And all of that got put together. So our analyst teams, instead of being siloed into individual products, we're focused on how we can drive insights across an entire enterprise, being agnostic to the individual product. And that is now called Strategic Solutions, which my co-founder Shan and I now lead, very much the insights division of the company. And that transformation, that organizational shift has driven tremendous growth for us.
And how do you go about, because when you read about what it is, the technology that you guys are providing, it's so cutting edge. How difficult is it to bring people on that journey? Because one of the things I often find, you look at people doing the AI stuff, it's just so fascinating that sometimes the feedback people, another client was telling me this, that their customers would give their sales guys the feedback that we didn't even know this was a thing. We didn't even know this could happen. So you're almost educating people before you're even selling to them. Does that resonate?
Brilliant question.
What you find?
I cannot tell you how on point that question is. When I started experimenting with this back at Nike or Weber Shandwick, customers would say, why should I use AI? Why should I even use like an automated data system, like a media monitoring platform? I've got surveys. And surveys have been around since Mesopotamia, So, going back to Babylon, you would do focus groups. So we're fine. And what I saw now since the advent of ChatGPT is it's the complete opposite, right? In fact, our customers come to us and say, I need to experiment with this. I need to demonstrate how I'm using this. And I'm very much open to understanding how this works. Doesn't mean you have an automatic customer who's just knocking on your door. But I think the embrace of AI to create content begged the very important question for us, which is how can you measure the impact of that content, of those activities? So Signal AI, to be clear, isn't a necessarily generative AI company. It's grounded in something called discriminative AI, which is all about the accuracy of data recall, the ability to tag in an article the specific company Apple versus Apple the fruit is something that is very difficult to do with keywords. Similarly, like with sustainability, often surveys will say, is this a sustainable company? Well, why? Is it about solar power, wind power, geothermal, carbon capture and storage, carbon credits, you name it. So I think what the AI has allowed us to do is unlock a more specific level of insight that very much immediately and tangibly proves the value prop. And I think, to be clear, because of the technology's agility, we're able to incorporate other old school market research methods. So for example, like surveys still have a valuable role to play in terms of providing qualitative feedback, how you feel about an individual brand. They're just not the only possible component of measuring corporate reputation. As an example, the Axios Harris Reputation Survey, and it is a survey, ranks Trader Joe's, the grocery store, and Chick-fil-A, the chicken nugget company, way higher than like Pfizer, which is making life-saving medicines that returned us to work and got over COVID. So that very much is an example of oversampling those old school methods, and we actually see it as a more cohesive collaboration, right? So yes, experimenting with AI, but point two, proving that it can tangibly measure impact in a much more specific way. And then three, it can still connect with, not necessarily always overwhelm, surveys which provide this qualitative, emotional level of insight.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense. So you're almost taking, I don't know, traditional methods, and you're basically modernizing traditional methods, I suppose, is the way you could sort of describe it, and helping people understand that there's some really smart ways that we can do things now that they might not have probably even heard of or considered before.
And on that journey, that also can include technology. So Signal, which has 10 years of track record in discriminative AI, is saying, okay, how can we experiment with generative AI to have a natural language interface for our products? So instead of, say, clicking on the button that says, give me the sentiment of Apple on AI regulation, you can just write that into the interface, similar to a ChatGPT or an Anthropic or anything else that you're well familiar with in the world of generative AI. And so I see this all coming together, right? I think our vision is that to be a horizontal, and by that I mean functionless, so it doesn't just work with marketing or comms, but could work with HR, IR, operations. To be a horizontal intelligence platform, you need to not only have world-class data, which Signal spent a decade licensing, you need to have the ability to slice through that data in a really agile way. And I think the combination of discriminative, accuracy of data, and generative, the natural language interface to slice through that data over and over. Well, tell me more about Sundar Pichai, or tell me more about Elon Musk on the specific talent topic. That I think will very much be the future. You include surveys with that, and then I think you really get a 360 understanding of what's shaping your reputation.
Right. Okay. And how do you bring, or have you found it, success in bringing people with you when it comes to your vision? Because working with scale-ups, what I tend to find is the founders are really excited. They've got a great product. They've got a great vision. They're hooked. They're like all in, right? But trying to sometimes convey that to somebody who is looking for a new challenge in their career isn't always easy. So how have you done that? How have you actually got talent into your teams by conveying your vision and getting people as stoked as you are?
There's perhaps nothing I'm prouder of than the team that we've built. And I think a lot of founders or executives say that, but the reason is the diversity of their backgrounds. I, as I mentioned early in my career, had a tough time switching literally between industries, right? From government to politics, while connected, is not always that natural. From politics into Fortune 100, not a normal leap. From the Fortune 100 into an agency or consulting context, people at Nike were like, you're crazy. And then from Weber Shandwick to starting my own company, why would you forego a paycheck? Yeah. Right? So in each time, I very much felt that. And as a result, we try very hard to pick unusual backgrounds and unbias ourselves when it comes to hiring. So I am really focused when it comes to hiring on finding agility versus the perfect fit. So what does that mean? That means that I'm looking for people who are really good at learning new skills, not necessarily need to have the skills that they'll need in this job right away. I'm looking for somebody with extreme ownership. Somebody who is like, I got this. I don't want to be micromanaged. I want to really see myself as a business owner. And then the intensity of drive, right? I think passion and perseverance and grit, we hear about grit all the time in the psychology world. That is absolutely essential versus somebody who's just saying, oh, it's product's fault. It's marketing's fault. It's sales fault. Like, all these excuses, like not really somebody that I'm looking for on the team. So as an example, like one of our top commercial hires is a former political fundraiser and campaign manager who used to raise money for congressional candidates out on New York, Long Island. Our head of reputation worked in climate advocacy and anti-smoking NGOs, went to the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and worked for the governor of Oregon before pivoting over into the world of communications. We have people who are on the analyst team, trained economists or former cancer researchers and bench scientists who are bringing their skills to bear. We just made a hire of somebody from the Oxford Internet Institute who, in addition to doing great analyses for Signal AI, is writing an academic paper with one of the world's largest consulting firms to validate our methodology, not only in the commercial context, but quite literally in like the elite academic circles. And so over and over, our story is, if you're willing to be agile and you're interested in learning, we believe that your drive can get you there. This is the opposite, I feel, of how big enterprise companies hire, where how many times have you seen somebody say in like life sciences come from a background that's way outside of the sciences? It's usually, oh, I worked at Novartis and I worked at Pfizer, so now I'm going to work at Amgen. And I'm a big believer in the opposite, that there's great talent out there who, because of this ingrained cultural bias that we have towards you have to have done it before in order for me to hire you, we're missing out on this top talent. And so for a scale up, we can be competitive. And a scale up, we can say, we'll focus, yes, on training you and supporting you. What we believe, though, is that you very much with your background will be able to shape our product. And that's why I'm super proud we've hired people from all around the world, ranging, as I mentioned, from economists to cancer researchers, and we've had quite impressive growth as a result.
I think that will give lots of people quite a lot of hope, really, because there are lots of career stories out there where individuals are looking at ways of how can I take my maybe corporate career and how can I take that into something maybe with a purpose that's more aligned to, maybe the values I have, or, just a complete new challenge in a scale up. So what have you seen over the years been some of the big hurdles that people have found if they're coming out of that corporate world and they're coming into a mission driven organization, a bit like you guys? What are some of the difficult bits or the obstacles that you've seen people struggle with?
I think the obstacles when you go from a more established, say, even larger company, going into starting your own company, let alone a scale up, so going from big to small, is that you really have to build the entrepreneurial mentality. And what I mean by that is when I was at a big company, say at Nike, I'll never forget what I would call the VP paradox, where if the VP was on vacation, no one did anything.
Right.
It was this fascinating thing. I actually remember one time the VP was out for 2 weeks and I used that time to test drive a bunch of new cars, like 3 p.m. in the middle of the day. It's unthinkable that our team at Signal AI would act that way, right? If I'm not around or I'm on vacation or whatever it might be, of course the work continues. Don't get me wrong, you should take time to test drive a new car or go to the dentist or whatever, but you are the CEO of your own operation. And that mentality, very different than how it is at big companies. As a result, we have a certain set of expectations that I think are also different than big companies, which are in big companies, you're expected to maybe know your executive quite well, but you don't necessarily have a horizon to the whole C-suite of executives. You're expected to know your vertical, your business line quite well, but not necessarily know the whole organization. And one of the values that I preach constantly is, you should be reading the quarterly earnings statement for the client. You should know the variety of products. You should look at the data across their entire business. And quite often, one of the signs we're doing a good job is a comment we hear from customers all the time, which is, our business better than we do. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't necessarily always think that's the case, but we are able to give that outside-in perspective that is often invaluable insight, whether it's helping them mitigate risk across their supply chain or helping them enhance reputation across marketing and communications. And that all starts fundamentally, to your question, with having intellectual agility on our team, extreme ownership, meaning they're constantly on the ball with their customers. They understand their business just as well as they possibly can. And I think also setting clear deadlines for deliverables in a way that makes the process very clear for the customer. So instead of us saying, okay, log in and, well, hopefully you get some value out of this, we are just constantly on the ball, engaging in real relationships with real people versus stepping back like this amorphous SaaS company saying, feel free to log in as you see fit. And I think that relational approach with the intensity of understanding the customer, I think has really made a significant difference for us. And that is true from our most junior analyst to up to senior leadership.
And how do you do that in the world we live now? You talked about you've got global workforce, global customer base. So much stuff happens on Teams and remotely. How do you maintain that? Firstly, that culture within your team and bring people together and maintain those relationships. How do you do that with your customer base when maybe you're not always physically together?
I would say actually the vast majority of our customers I've never physically met.
Right.
Which is an unusual thing, right? Going back to pre-COVID, I remember at Weber Shandwick or at Nike, I would be flying around the world. I mean, I mentioned that time on a Formula One racetrack to watch guys run a marathon around the Monza F1 circuit is unthinkable, right? Today that we would go on work trips like that all the time, but that was like a weekly occasion. So I think it really puts a greater onus. You asked about dealing with customers. It puts a greater onus on us doing two interesting things. One, having greater industry expertise, and two, providing tangible examples to make what we're talking about come to life. It's a lot easier to explain a product when you're sitting at a keyboard with somebody or you have a whiteboard session, but I live in Boston and we have a customer in San Diego. It's quite unlikely that we'll always be in the same room. So the way that we approach this is, one, we've actually really specialized in particular industries and hired talent that is attuned to and works in particular on those industries. I mentioned, for example, we have somebody who's a former bench scientist, cancer researcher, and she leads our life sciences vertical.
Right.
And that's really, really helpful for our customers because they might be saying, okay, how is this analysis on the brain cancer landscape relevant to us? But then they might ask, well, what does the brain cancer landscape look like overall? So moving the customers away from just looking at their individual vertical, their individual silo, to having industry-wide breadth, that requires having talent who specializes in that industry and building products that analyze the industry at the same depth we would be analyzing the client. So that's one really essential thing. And then, the second thing is just being super tangible with how we can slice our analysis or how we might be able to help. So we will often show examples of just the different ways you can use the data to make sure that we're not just providing interesting information, but that insight is being driven to action. So what do I mean by that? We'll show a communications customer, here's how you can use our technology to analyze the reputational impact of an M&A acquisition or an earnings announcement, or a big conference like the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. So we show particular examples where the insight drove a specific activation, and that very much makes folks who aren't necessarily data literate feel more comfortable with how they're going to be able to use the insight from our platform to actually drive real world impact.
That makes sense. When you talk about the specialism bit, you're actually putting together people that are experts in a certain field. But it's almost feels a little bit like when you talked about you not being a salesperson when you were with your customers, you were almost looking at the problem from a slightly different angle. So, hey, Mr. Customer, I'm not an exact expert in what you do, but I know a whole bunch of stuff about this. And you can almost therefore build a relationship with that person because you're looking at the problem from maybe a different perspective, and that opens maybe new conversations, new angles that perhaps you'd not even thought of before, that maybe the customer hadn't thought of before.
That's exactly right. My view was, and listen, when you are a founder, you fundamentally have one goal above all else, which is drive revenue. So don't get me wrong. Early on, in particular, before I had access to Signal AI's world-class go-to-market team, you are very much in the sales role. But the way that I would approach it, and the way I still approach it, even if it is in fact a customer pitch, is, listen, I might be able to have your job. Now, I'm probably not as qualified as them, but I've worked in a similar enough context that if you were to slot me in for you, the customer's job tomorrow, I wouldn't totally blow things up. So for me, it's like this intellectual challenge of, like, how might I approach it? And so my questions are less, like, what monitoring service do you use? And more, what asks are you supposed to drive from the corporate strategy? What pressure are you getting from the CEO? What do other functions bring with regard to measuring impact, whether it's sales or marketing or operations or finance? How can we best understand the way your team is organized? And so I spend as much time looking at our customers' org charts and corporate strategy plans as I do the drumbeat of media that we will naturally ingest and analyze as part of our ongoing relationship. So that very much is the way to approach it. And the key thing, right, is to scale beyond yourself. So if you're a founder who has a deep connection to or expertise in the industry or the function that your customers are in, the best thing that you can do is hire a team with similar expertise, right? So hire that life sciences expert because you're doing a lot of work in pharma, or hire that communications expert because you're working with a lot of corporate comms teams. The thing that we aren't all looking for is this identical clone of the same person, but instead building the dream team in aggregate with skills that wouldn't necessarily be the first thing you think of with a SaaS company, but nonetheless for the customers make the SaaS platform far more approachable.
And that's diverse thinking right there, isn't it? That's the benefit of having people looking at things differently and bringing together, different ways of thinking versus, like you said, that cliche, we'll just hire the person that's worked the same role in these two other companies that do exactly the same thing, and they're not going to really bring a whole load of fresh perspective to the table.
And I think about this very much from a management perspective. I love doing the management side of things because it's really fun to be a coach. I've got a 2-year-old here at home, and it's amazing to watch her scale up her skill sets, whether it's like being able to kick a soccer ball
Yeah.
or, hold her own cup. And I will tell you, it's really fun on the management side because what I've learned are a couple core lessons, right? Which is one, the power of not doing everything yourself, right? Understanding that I'm actually not the best person to do every aspect of the company. There's somebody else out there who, with like 3 months of training, will eclipse me. And I've got to be humble enough to understand that. The second thing is deep coaching. I really believe in like having the team embedded and watching the folks who are doing a good job constantly. So not just hiring somebody and saying, here's your portfolio, I'll check in once a week. Our new hires, particularly the ones that I directly manage, they are on like every single call with me constantly. So I'm constantly doing calls with them, having them watch, recap what we heard, how might you approach this? And over again, you sort of create this mind meld, except they're able to enhance it because they're bringing a totally great outside perspective. And then the final bit on the management piece, and I think the most important, is being open to letting the team course correct, right? So there's a lot of times where you see founders get, celebrated over and over. Got great vision, got great vision, got great vision. Well, my view is that, yes, you've got to have great vision. You've got to be clear about where you're headed, but it very much should be the team's responsibility. In fact, they should be the shepherds of how do we get there? And I think it's been amazing to see a culture where my team will come to me and say, I think you're wrong. Here's why I think you're wrong. And it's all about the way that I react, right? It's all about me saying, thank you for challenging. And now it's to the point where, I can even look at a facial expression from somebody and it's like, oh God, like maybe this is a bad idea. So I think it's so important to get to a culture where as a manager, you are modeling a behavior of saying, I was wrong, you were right, let's try something new. And almost every corporate executive I've worked with is loath to say the words, I was wrong, you were right, let's try something new. So I try very much to speed that process of having the team course correct me and my co-founder and the leadership at Signal AI. And the result has been a far more powerful experience for our customers.
So you've got this really inclusive, I suppose is the right word, leadership style there, where everybody has a voice, and I think I think increasingly that's really important, and that is what people are looking for now in the companies that they work for and the leaders that they work for. So again, it's very common. Founders will give me this feedback, and they'll talk about having this great passion about looking after the people they work for and making sure people are empowered and all this stuff. But who's actually looking after you? So who, as who as a founder are you looking up to? Who are your mentors? Who are the people that are helping you get through all this? How do you find inspiration?
Well, I definitely believe that you need to have a ongoing kitchen cabinet, to use a term from politics. So I would not call it a superpower so much as an annoyance for my wife, is like, I have no problem being on the phone with people all day. Right. So I have friends I'll call and check in with for 15 minutes and they'll give me a ton of feedback. And those are like friends from college, people you can be sort of like really bluntly honest with. And then I have industry friends. So friends who are experts in, say, corporate communications at a Fortune 100, old friends at Nike even, who I can go back to and say, hey, listen, I'm thinking about approaching a new customer this way, or we're going to try to launch a new product. Could you test it out? I'll even have friends, who work at consulting firms, and I'll send them, a blinded part of a deck and say, like, how would you use this? How would you run with this if you were McKinsey or BCG? But internally, I'm lucky. Signal AI is this fantastic culture. It's not every day that you get acquired by a company and then really empowered to build even faster and even bigger than you were when you were on your own. And so as part of Strategic Solutions, we very much work with the CEO and founder, David Benningson, the COO, Stephen Lucas, the Chief Revenue Officer, who also fortunately lives in Boston, is my Boston homie, Nancy McNeil, who has great tenure at Dow Jones and Thomson Reuters. And being able to work so successfully with our ELT has really just enabled us to have better alignment with the future of Signal's product, right? So as Signal continues to expand into the world of, say, like risk intelligence and not just PR and communications intelligence, we're all collectively learning together, whether that's engaging with consultants, whether that's hiring talent that really specializes in the risk space, whether it's collectively experimenting with generative AI. And so I definitely feel not only supported by the leadership here at Signal AI, but importantly, we are on this collective, I think, ego-free journey of all constantly learning and experimenting together versus leaning on, say, just one person to set the vision and then we're all marching in this set hierarchy. So it's a very collaborative, flat atmosphere, which I think from a scale-up perspective allows you to build much faster, better, more intuitive products.
I think that comes across massively in the way you've spoken, about not only how you manage your people, but how you work as a, leadership collective. And it's that bit about leaving the ego at the door. It feels like you can't afford to have that in the world that you guys are in. You've got to all be like shoulder to shoulder, fixing the problems and building this thing up piece by piece. It doesn't work if you're just dictating to people, here's how it's got to be and do this, do that.
I'll never forget when I got to Nike, I was fresh out of politics, right? And I was like fresh out of like a losing campaign.
Right.
Ego was not at the highest bid, far from thinking like, I'm the man, I'm here at the swoosh. I was pretty intimidated and definitely had a good amount of fake it till you make it coursing through my veins. And I remember being in a meeting, I think it was about quarterly earnings, where we were talking about how to convey Nike's latest global revenue results. And I remember distinctively feeling this thunderbolt of thought, which was, oh, no one's smarter than us in here. And I didn't mean like I was the smartest guy in the world. What I meant was I just sort of assumed that people in corporate America were much smarter than people in politics because politics is cacophonous and crazy and people in corporate America do quite well. And I sort of looked around thinking like, oh, like, no. Like, yes, they have more domain knowledge. They know more about investor relations and marketing and even the shoemaking business. But fundamentally, like I'm able to understand what everyone's talking about. And so I had sort of approached it as like, oh, there is no way I'm going to be hanging on here. It is a scam that they even hired me to reaching out to my friends in politics saying you can do it too. And that's why, for example, at Kelp and Signal AI, we've hired so many people with diverse backgrounds. I don't care that you're an economist. Like you can really help corporate executives make decisions. I don't care that you were a bench scientist. I don't care that you worked at NGOs, or I don't care you were a political fundraiser. And that I think has been so important. So when I say ego-free, what I mean is trying to supersede the doubts that naturally creep in constantly. Make no mistake, like I could not single-handedly write code that improved Signal AI's product. In fact, my co-founder had more to do with really developing the product at Kelp. But what I can do is try to constantly put myself empathetically in the customer's shoes and approach the building conversation as an outside-in expert versus constantly being mired in my own myopia. And I think that lesson learned at Nike where, like I can intellectually hang at the table is true for so many people out there. So if you're listening to this, and you're saying, I've only worked in one field, one type of company, one function, rest assured, like the power of the human brain is creativity and agility. You just need to put yourself in that uncomfortable first 6 months to get up to speed, and then you'll be able to contribute probably way better than my limited IQ has allowed me to do.
I think that's really good advice. I think that's really, really good. So a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, what's your next mission? Where are you guys headed? What's the next step for Signal AI? Where are you taking this thing? What's exciting?
I'm so fortunate not only to have been Signal's first acquisition, but to have joined Signal at this inflection point, not only for the industry of AI, which has obviously exploded. I mean, what company doesn't claim they're AI based, but to join a company with a decade with native AI experience, to have built something truly proprietary and then see the way that it scales. So our vision, as we've talked about, is to be a horizontal intelligence platform that works across corporate functions with some of the world's most sophisticated businesses. We're already working with more than half of the Fortune 500, and I'm really excited to see how this extends. So that could be the intersection of discriminative and generative AI, as I mentioned, using natural language to sift through really complex and gigantic data sets. We're absorbing 2.5 billion documents every single year. And the intersection of discriminative AI to grab just what you need and not hallucinate, and generative AI to sort through that data and get to insight faster, that's incredibly exciting. It takes immense data and technology firepower. So I'm really excited that we're going to be moving in that space. So stay tuned for some products to come that I may have access to that other folks will very much love having access to. The second thing is really doubling down on helping companies manage, mitigate, and avoid risk. So risk can take a huge number of forms. It could be natural disasters, supply chain disruptions, management, human rights, sourcing, innovation, you name it. And I'm really excited to team up with several colleagues internally who are very much leading on this to shape what the future of a risk offering might look like, to expand the power of this interface I talked about from the comms and marketing department into the finance, investor relations, HR, and operations department to really be this intelligence engine for Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. That's really exciting. And then the last bit I would say is just personally, I'm really excited to see where the team takes us, right? I mean, I've been at quote unquote Kelp and now Signal AI and this new version of our Insights division, Strategic Solutions, for several years now, and we're hiring quite rapidly. And it's just amazing for me to sit down with folks and say, we are not just hiring you for a job, we are hiring you to help design the future of what it looks like to work here. And so for me, it's just amazing to be surrounded by this like fleet of innovators who, from a cultural standpoint, we are saying you own your individual relationships to the point that you're building stuff for them. And then the flexibility of the technology and the platform to facilitate that. It's amazing to see these new ideas come to life, whether that's cool new dashboards and interesting metrics, or even more excitingly, cool new clients who are asking us increasingly more complicated questions that are extremely niche and complex. And candidly, sometimes I have to Google what they're even talking about. And then nonetheless, the technology with a talented team is able to pull off a depth of insight that makes them super giddy. So those sorts of variables are what I'm excited to work on next.
And you can see just the way you talk so passionately about it there, just how excited you are about, this future we're headed into, what AI can do for us in all these different areas. So what would you say to people out there who are maybe looking at it slightly differently and their outlook is AI is really bad and AI is going to take everybody's jobs and AI is going to be disastrous? What do you say to those guys?
I'm going to answer this in a way you might not expect. So other than launching the company and scaling it within Signal AI, the other passion project I took on last year was running for local political office. Right. I've always wanted to run for my local town council. So I was trying to represent like a 2-mile by 2-mile block. It's about as small scale as you can start. And it's so interesting when you run for office, you have to knock on people's doors. And in my town, mainly the voters are like 70 or 80 years old. It leans very much older. It's not so much a young family crowd in the nice town of Newton, Massachusetts. And I would have to explain relatively arcane issues, whether it was like development policy. Okay, we're going to build a few new apartments in town, but don't worry, it's not going to be bad traffic. Or why we need to make it easier to open restaurants. Yes, I know you cook at home every single day, but people do like that new pizza place. Yeah. And it sort of gave me this more innate understanding of what it is to translate complex topics into digestible terms so that we can best understand from the same level of fact. And so, what I would say is like, in the business that I'm in now, AI definitely can feel intimidating. And so the way that I found to defang it is to just show tangible examples of how it can help. So with a customer, that might be us showing other industry examples, as I mentioned, whether it's a conference or an executive moment or message analysis or campaign understanding of like, just here is a very understandable case study. And to be honest, in politics, it's the same sort of thing. So I developed a custom custom GPT called
Cool.
Newton GPT. I uploaded every email from the mayor and every city council meeting transcript. And then you can ask it, like, what roads were repaved in the last year? Or how many kids are in our school system? Or break down the city's budget. And when I did that, and I could whip it out on my phone and say, I work for a technology company, and I can explain this issue using technology in a bit more tangible ways. What question do you have of Newton GPT? People, I think, understand the issue a little bit better. So whether it's running for a local office or trying to scale your company into a Fortune 500, showing tangible examples of folks and relating to people as humans, because I also failed algebra like 4 times. I think that's so important. In other words, if I were to be more focused in answering this question, it is not about technology alone. And the power of AI is very much in the personalization for each individual using it. And so I think the most important thing that we can do at Signal AI or collectively in the AI industry is continue to demonstrate tangible use cases and move us out of this discussion around this arms race around like who's got the best LLM, right? It's really got to be, here's how it can help you tomorrow, and beyond, write a poem to my wife on her birthday. And I think we will get there. But obviously that goes hand in hand with trust, right? So the ability to transparently look through data, that's the real power of discriminative AI. You can see every single data point driving our scores versus it being a black box. The ability to like ethically train AI. So we, for example, train topics, and that also can't be a black box. We've got a system to transparently show when we test ourselves versus the AI, here are the sort of data that are being recalled by it. So we can show you this topic is in fact on target. And I think that's going to be so important, whether it's Signal AI or another company, to just demonstrate with transparency, here's the raw ingredients that are going into it, and here are the tangible benefits that you can get out of it. So just consistently within the AI industry, being translators in chief, being savvy enough with the platforms to build something that people could use and appreciate, but also being empathetic enough to those people who aren't coders like myself, so that we can continually leverage their feedback as design partners.
I think you said something really interesting there, which is to do with, and I'm seeing this a lot, that feeling of like people are jumping on the AI bandwagon, if you like, it's the next big thing. And because of my role, working with lots of different tech companies, some just seem so poor at actually articulating what it is that they're doing. It's almost like they put the AI badge on just to be part of the club and be like, yeah, we do something with the AI. So it's like, what is it that you do? Whereas you seem that you've got it so clear in your messaging and what you're doing and talking about being ethical there. I think that's really important as well, to help the consumer feel comfortable that they actually want to engage in conversation with you about it, rather than maybe feeling anxious or overawed by it because it is such a big area.
Well, I think the reason for that is because I approach it very much from the problem and not the solution first.
Yeah.
Right. It's on me as the person at the company to translate the problem into some sort of solution. But I think so many technology companies make the mistake of being so solution that you would need like a member of the company to embed with the customer just to make that solution tangible. So we here at Signal AI are all about making sure that the interface with our platform is as custom as possible. You have your own dedicated instance. It's personalized to your corporate narrative. It has your particular topics and executives and competitive set in it. It has to be custom to you. And that is because whether it was from the starting of Kelp to the acquisition within Signal AI to scaling strategic solutions here, we've had this same cultural focus, which is it is customer obsession, which you hear from everybody, to the point where we are constantly helping to turn our platform into something that feels not only indispensable to the client, but literally as if the client actually made it themselves. So that I think is just so important when you're starting a tech company and you're equipping folks who are not necessarily technologists.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Well, this has been absolutely awesome to talk to you. I think what I've loved is the passion that you clearly have, and I think that's really going to resonate with people. I think the story from going from where the journey through to Nike and then through to where you are now, I just think is totally, I've never heard a story like that before, so I think it's really interesting. So if people are keen to hear more about what you're doing, and you said to me you've got your own podcast running at the moment. So what's the story there? How can people
not
check
as successful as not as successful as this one, but we just launched a podcast called Signal in the Noise. Feel free to look me up on LinkedIn, Daniel Gaynor, Gaynor. And in addition, my email is dan.gaynor@signal-ai.com. Be more than happy to have a chat. Who knows where things go. And yes, our podcast is relatively nascent, so maybe I'll have you on next time to fill out the roster.
So what do you talk about on your pod? What do you chat to people about?
Well, we talk about AI-driven communications and measuring impact for communications and marketing. We've had everybody on from the head of communications for the New York Department of Education to people at Fortune 100s, to people at private equity firms and healthcare companies. So it's really great to sort of bring this nascent industry into a bit of focus. We talk about that, but we also talk, I think, about leadership lessons, right? So one of the things you've heard me talk about is the importance of having opinions that are fungible and not set in your ways, and how it's okay to be a polymath, that vertical expertise, while important, isn't everything. The importance of a phrase that I'm stealing from New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg of "In God We Trust" and "Everyone else bring data," and how data breeds meritocracy and equanimity and intelligent decision making. And so it's just really interesting to hear that philosophy expressed by individuals who are at companies as different as healthcare companies and tech companies and private equity funds and government agencies. And so for me, it's also an excuse just to do a little bit of learning by listening. And it's been a lot of fun as a result.
Yeah, well, I've definitely learned a lot talking to you, Dan. So, thank you for taking the time. This has been awesome.
Definitely. I will be sure to, play this on repeat every time we go for a long car ride with my wife. And hopefully she gets some good material. But in all seriousness, thank you. This has been really, really fun to chat, and more than happy for anybody listening to reach out to me just for a casual conversation or to learn more about Signal AI and anything in between.
Cool. Awesome. Nice to chat to you, Dan.
Thanks so much, James. Appreciate it.